The billionaire's biggest blunder. She wasn't crying. She was buying the 100K dress. Stop. You are about to witness the most savage and elegant corporate takedown in high society history. Elias Vance thought he was trading a dull wife for a luxury plaything. His mistress, Serena Hayes, believed she had secured her crown. Neither of them knew three crucial things. First, that his wife, Clara Sterling, had orchestrated every detail for them to be there that night. Second, that the flash drive in Clara's Hermes bag held photographic proof of Serena's dalliances with two other married men. And third, the most important, in 30 minutes, Serena would be weeping like a child, while Clara would become the legend that the New York elite would tell for the next 50 years. Smash that like button now, share this epic story, and subscribe to the channel. The golden cage of the Metropolitan Gala. The September night at the Metropolitan Elite Club in Manhattan was saturated with ostentation and deceit. Baccarat crystal chandeliers poured golden light over the main ballroom, where the crème de la crème of American society gathered for the traditional Sterling Foundation Gala. The air conditioning held the temperature perfect, a stark contrast to the suffocating heat of the hypocrisy that hung among the guests. Elias Vance adjusted the cuff of his Italian silk shirt for the third time in 5 minutes. At 38, the real estate mogul had built an empire that guaranteed his constant presence in social columns. But on this specific night, he felt particularly anxious. Not because of the importance of the event. He'd attended dozens of similar galas, but because of the company he chose to bring. Serena Hayes glided through the ballroom as if she owned the place. At 29, the young woman flaunted an impactful, artificial beauty, platinum blonde hair falling in perfect waves over bare shoulders, highlighted by a scarlet-red Valentino dress that Elias had bought especially for the occasion. The generous cleavage and the fabric that hugged every curve of her body were not missed by the masculine eyes present, nor by the whispered comments of the society ladies. "Elias, darling, what a surprise to see you here, and accompanied." The voice of Eleanor Harrington, the wife of the state senator, cut the air like a razor. Her eyes scanned Serena up and down, a predatory analysis disguised as social courtesy. "Eleanor, always a pleasure." Elias forced a smile, while feeling sweat bead on his forehead. "This is Serena Hayes, my special consultant." Serena laughed, a crystalline sound that echoed through the environment. "Consultant? How modest, darling. We are much more intimate than that, aren't we?" Her blood-red nails possessively stroked Elias's arm. Elias's embarrassment was palpable, but Serena seemed to feed on the situation. She had spent months planning this moment, the night she would finally be introduced to society as the new Mrs. Elias Vance. In her youthful, ambitious mind, this was her official coronation. The legitimate wife, Clara, had become a ghostly figure in their conversations, a woman who preferred discretion to the spotlight. And that, to Serena, was a sign of weakness. "Where is Mrs. Vance, dear?" Eleanor's question was delivered with the surgical precision of someone who knows exactly where to poke to cause pain. "I haven't seen her at social events in ages." Elias swallowed hard. "Clara has been busy with personal projects." "What a shame," Eleanor murmured, though her tone suggested the exact opposite. She was such an elegant woman, always knew how to carry herself with class. The word was hung in the air like a death sentence. Serena felt a stab of irritation. Why did they always compare her to that bland woman? Elias had told her that Clara was boring, dull, a wife who was content to stay home reading books instead of accompanying him to important events. To Serena, this only proved that some women were born to shine, while others were born to fade away. "Elias, "I need to speak to you about the Hudson Yards project," interrupted Marcus Thorne, one of the company's minority partners. Elias's relief was instantaneous. As the men moved away to discuss business, Serena remained alone in the center of the ballroom, feeling like a queen on her throne. Social photographers' flashes found her constantly, and she knew her photos would be splashed across the gossip magazines next week. Elias Vance's new passion. She could already imagine the headlines. Champagne flowed generously among the guests, and Serena didn't deprive herself. With every sip, she felt more confident, more in control of the situation. She approached a group of socialites she knew superficially from the Upper East Side salons and gyms. "Serena, what a stunning dress," commented Penelope Alva, the wife of a federal judge. "Valentino? Michael's gift," Serena replied, making sure to emphasize the intimacy. "He has refined taste in choosing women's clothing." The women exchanged knowing glances. They all knew what this meant. Elias Vance was publicly flaunting his mistress, behavior that, though not uncommon in those circles, still caused a frisson when done so brazenly. "And how are you adjusting to the new position?" Penelope's question had a double meaning, and they all laughed discreetly. "Perfectly," Serena replied, raising her chin. "In fact, I've always felt more at home in this environment than certain people who isolate themselves at home." The catty comment about Clara did not go unnoticed. The women present knew the unwritten code of high society. When a wife stopped showing up at events, it usually meant she had lost the battle to a younger, more ambitious rival. Across the room, Elias tried to concentrate on the business conversation, but his eyes constantly wandered to Serena. Part of him felt proud to be with a woman so young and attractive. It was a confirmation of his virility and success. Another part, however, began to question the wisdom of so openly exposing his extramarital relationship. "She's beautiful," Marcus commented, following Elias's gaze. "But don't you think it's risky to bring your friend to an event of this caliber?" "Serena isn't just a friend," Elias countered, more defensive than he intended. "We have a serious relationship." "Serious?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "And your wife knows about this." Elias looked away. Clara knew, of course. How could she not? The rumors had been rife for months, and he didn't even bother to be discreet. But Clara, true to her reserved temperament, hadn't made scenes or threats. She simply retreated further, which Elias had interpreted as tacit acceptance of the new situation. "Clara understands that our marriage has evolved into something different," he mumbled, sipping Scotch whiskey. The truth was, Elias had married Clara Sterling 15 years ago for practical reasons. She came from a traditional family with important connections in the judiciary and politics, connections that were crucial to the growth of his business. Clara was intelligent, cultured, a perfect wife on paper. But as the years passed, Elias began to see her as part of the furniture, always present, always reliable, but lacking the sparkle and excitement he had begun to seek elsewhere. Serena represented everything his wife was not: spontaneous, sensual, impressionable. When he met her at a law firm party where she worked as a receptionist, he was immediately attracted by her youth and her thirst for social climbing. It was easy to impress her with expensive dinners and luxurious gifts. It was easy to be the hero in the life of someone who came from a small apartment in Brooklyn. "Elias," Serena's voice called him back to the present. She approached with a radiant smile, followed by a younger man he recognized as Julian Foster, heir to one of the country's biggest fortunes. "Julian was just telling me about the new art collection he recently acquired," Serena said, her eyes shining with interest. "Picasso, Van Gogh, it's fascinating." Elias felt a pang of irritation. Serena was clearly flirting, and Julian, known for his conquering reputation, seemed eager to reciprocate. It was humiliating to have to compete for the attention of his own mistress in public. "Serena, we need to talk to the event organizers," he interrupted, taking her by the arm. "But Elias, Julian was inviting me to see his private gallery." She pouted. "Another time," Elias replied dryly, guiding her away from the young heir. As they walked through the ballroom, Serena murmured in his ear, "No need to be jealous, darling. You know you're the only man in my life." The words should have reassured him, but Elias felt a growing unease. There was something about Serena's attitude tonight, an excessive confidence, a presumption that her place was guaranteed, that deeply bothered him. Near the main table, where the event organizers and some important politicians were seated, Elias spotted Charles Monroe, an influential social journalist. The man was observing them with obvious interest, already mentally drafting the note that would appear in his column the next day. "Elias Vance, long time no see." Charles approached with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. And this lovely young woman must be Mrs. Vance? The silence that followed was deafening. Elias felt his face flush, while Serena, far from being embarrassed, smiled even wider. "Not yet," she replied with a giggle. "But who knows, soon." The insinuation was crystal clear. Serena wasn't just content to be the mistress. She had bigger plans, and she was announcing those plans to one of the most dangerous gossips in the city. Elias forced a nervous laugh. "Charles, you know Serena Hayes." "Serena, Charles is one of New York's most respected journalists." "Immense pleasure," Charles said, kissing Serena's hand with exaggerated gallantry. "I imagine we'll have a lot to talk about in the coming times." The veiled threat was not missed by Elias. Charles Monroe had the power to make or break reputations with a single column. If he decided to turn the situation into a scandal, the consequences could be devastating, not just for his public image, but for his business. While they talked, the ballroom continued to fill. Influential politicians greeted businessmen. Socialites displayed their latest jewelry and couture acquisitions, and the orchestra played classic waltzes, creating a perfect soundtrack for this theater of appearances. Serena was in her element. She waved to acquaintances, posed for photos, greeted important people as if she were, in fact, Mrs. Vance. Every gesture was calculated to solidify her position, to make it clear that she was not just a fleeting affair, but the new reality in Elias's life. But in the back of her ambitious mind, Serena couldn't entirely ignore the whispers she heard as she passed. "Where is Clara Sterling?" What an embarrassing situation. Poor Clara was always such a distinguished lady. Why did everyone insist on talking about that woman? Serena had never met her personally. Elias always said Clara preferred to avoid conflict and confrontation. For her, this only confirmed her superiority. While Clara hid at home, she shone in the high society ballrooms. What Serena didn't know was that at that very moment, just a few blocks away, Clara Sterling was meticulously preparing for her own entrance at the Metropolitan Elite Club. And when she arrived, nothing would ever be the same. Question for the audience. Do you think Serena and Elias are digging their own grave by being so open? Or is this the New York way of doing business? Let us know what you think in the comments below. The general prepares for battle. Clara Sterling stood before the full-length mirror in her walk-in closet, observing her own image with the analytical coldness of a general planning a battle. At 30, she possessed a mature, sophisticated beauty that contrasted sharply with the youthful, obvious appeal of her rival. Her dark brown hair fell in soft waves to her shoulders, framing a face with classic features that dispensed with heavy makeup to make an impact. The dress she had chosen for the night was a masterpiece of French haute couture, a flawless black Chanel gown with pearl details running along the discreet yet elegant neckline. The piece had cost more than many cars, but it wasn't the price that made it special. It was what it represented: power, class, legitimacy. everything Serena Hayes was trying to buy with money borrowed from another woman's husband. Clara knew exactly what was happening at the Metropolitan Elite Club right now. She had received no less than fiend calls from concerned friends throughout the week, each one anxious to be the first to tell her about the public humiliation Elias was inflicting upon her. What none of them knew was that Clara had orchestrated every detail of that situation. "Ma'am, the car has arrived," announced Mrs. Gable, her housekeeper for over a decade, appearing at the closet door. The middle-aged woman looked at Clara with admiration and concern in equal measure. "Are you sure you want to go through with this?" Clara smiled, the first genuine smile she had shown in months. "I've never been so sure of anything in my life, Mrs. Gable." The truth was, Clara had discovered Elias's betrayal long before any social gossip. Not because she was particularly astute, but because Elias was embarrassingly careless. Receipts for expensive dinners for two when he was supposedly in business meetings, charges for jewelry and dresses on his corporate card, a women's perfume on his clothes that was definitely not hers. During the first few months, Clara had felt the familiar pain of betrayal, the wounded ego, the sense of inadequacy, the questioning of where she had failed as a wife. But then, on a particularly melancholic Tuesday afternoon, something shifted. She was flipping through a wedding photo album when she came across an image of herself on the day of the ceremony. In that photo, she radiated a light that had been lost over the years of marriage. It was then that Clara understood a liberating truth. She hadn't lost Elias to Serena because she had failed as a wife. She had lost Elias because he had failed as a man. From this epiphany, Clara began to plan. Not a vulgar, emotional revenge, but a cold, surgical strategy that would not only expose the couple's farce, but also guarantee the freedom she had unconsciously desired for years. For the next 6 months, Clara observed. She discreetly hired a private investigator, not to confirm the betrayal she already knew, but to meticulously document it. Photographs, videos, hotel registries, even recordings of compromising conversations Elias and Serena maintained in public places, believing themselves safe in the bubble of arrogance they had created. More importantly, Clara used this time to reorganize her finances. Elias had always assumed she was financially dependent on him, a sexist and ignorant assumption. In reality, Clara had inherited a considerable fortune from her paternal grandmother, investments in real estate and stocks that she managed personally, without involving her husband. Furthermore, she possessed her own art consulting business that yielded much more than Elias imagined. During the months of absence from social events, Clara had also dedicated herself to herself in a way she hadn't in years. Personal trainer 3 times a week, regular aesthetic treatments, a complete wardrobe renovation. Not to win back Elias. That bridge had been irreversibly burned, but for herself. On this specific night, Clara had chosen the Sterling Foundation Gala for precise strategic reasons. It was an event that brought together the hard core of the New York elite, people who had known her family for decades and who respected her lineage and class. It was also an environment where the unwritten social rules worked in her favor. As much as they tolerated male excesses in private, the public exposure of a marital betrayal was still seen as an act of poor taste that should be punished. Most crucially, Clara knew Elias would bring Serena to the ball. It was she who, through a mutual friend, had planted the idea in the ambitious mistress's head. "The Sterling Foundation Gala is the most important event of the year," she had commented strategically during a luncheon. "That's where society really shows up." Clara's private driver, Mr. Peterson, awaited her at the building entrance. He was a discreet, loyal man who had worked for the Sterling family for almost 20 years. He knew all the secrets, all the nuances of Clara's life, and his discretion was absolute. "Good evening, Madam Clara," He greeted her, opening the door of the black Mercedes-Benz S-Class. "You look stunning tonight." "Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Let's go to the Metropolitan Elite Club." During the 30-minute drive, Clara mentally reviewed every detail of her plan. She had timed her arrival for the exact moment the gala was at its peak, when all the important guests were already present, when the social photographers were most active, when Elias and Serena were most relaxed and confident. Clara's phone vibrated with a message from Hannah Dubois, the wife of a Supreme Court justice and one of her oldest friends. "Darling, they are shamelessly showing off. She is practically announcing herself as your replacement. Come quickly and put an end to this farce." Clara smiled, reading the message. Hannah had always been her fiercest ally, an old guard woman who staunchly believed that certain social traditions and hierarchies should be respected. To Hannah, Serena was nothing more than a classless arrivist, trying to occupy a place that did not belong to her. Other messages followed, all from indignant friends, reporting the attitudes of Elias and Serena. "She is wearing a red Valentino, completely inappropriate for a charity event," wrote Penelope Alva. He introduced her as a special consultant, but she corrected him herself, saying they were much more intimate, added Eleanor Harrington. Every message confirmed that Clara's plan was working perfectly. Elias and Serena were digging their own graves with an almost comical excitement. Clara thought about her life with Elias during the early years of marriage. She had genuinely tried to be a good wife, support him in business, accompany him to social events, keep the house immaculate, be the perfect companion on all occasions. But Elias had always seemed to see her as an expensive, well-educated accessory, not a true partner. As the years passed, she realized that Elias had chosen her not for love, but for social convenience. She brought respectability, family connections, and an image of an ideal wife that complemented his business ambitions. In contrast, he offered her financial security and social status, a commercial transaction disguised as romance. Clara's awakening to this reality was gradual but irreversible. She began to notice how Elias ignored her during conversations at social events, how he interrupted her when she expressed opinions, how he assumed his own decisions were automatically correct without consulting her perspective. Small humiliations that accumulated over the years until they formed an unbearable weight. When she discovered the betrayal, Clara initially felt devastated. But as she observed Elias's behavior with Serena, the way he melted before her feigned naivete, how he felt important playing the ambitious young woman's mentor, she realized she hadn't lost a true love. She had gotten rid of a burden. "We are arriving, Madam Clara," announced Mr. Peterson, interrupting her reflections. Clara looked out the window and saw the golden lights of the Metropolitan Elite Club gleaming in the night. Dozens of luxury cars were parked at the entrance, while paparazzi and social photographers awaited the arrival of important personalities. The red carpet stretched from the sidewalk to the main door, flanked by lush floral arrangements. "Mr. Peterson, give me 5 more minutes," Clara requested. "I want my entrance to be memorable." She opened her Hermès bag and checked the contents one last time. Besides the usual items, lipstick, compact powder, wallet, there was a discreet flash drive containing all the documents and evidence she had collected about Elias and Serena. She didn't plan to use it tonight, but it was always good to have a trump card up her sleeve. Clara also carried something much more powerful than any physical evidence, the absolute certainty that she was doing the right thing. For 15 years, she had been the perfect, discreet wife who solved problems without making waves. Tonight, she would be exactly the opposite. Her phone vibrated one last time. It was a message from Charles Monroe, the social journalist. "Clara, darling, I heard you were coming to the ball. Good. I've missed your elegance at these events. See you inside." Perfect. Charles was clearly setting the stage for an epic confrontation between wife and mistress. Like all good gossip journalists, he could sense the drama in the air and wanted to ensure he had a front-row seat when everything exploded. "Now, Mr. Peterson, it's showtime." The driver smiled in the rearview mirror. He had watched Clara grow from a timid young woman to a powerful woman, and knew that this night would be historic. When the Mercedes stopped in front of the Metropolitan Elite Club, a murmur spread among the photographers. Clara Sterling had become a mysterious figure in recent months. Her absence from social events had generated speculation and conspiracy theories. Now, her reappearance promised answers. Mr. Peterson stepped out of the car and walked calmly to the back door. The silence was almost palpable. Even the most experienced paparazzi knew they were about to witness something extraordinary. When the door opened and Clara placed her foot on the red carpet, there was a moment of temporal suspension. She was radiant in a way no one remembered seeing before, more confident, more imposing, more genuinely powerful. The flashes went off in a frantic sequence as Clara walked slowly toward the entrance. Every step was calculated. Every movement was a declaration. She greeted the photographers with graceful nods, but did not stop for interviews. There was more important work to be done. At the club entrance, the doorman received her with an almost feudal bow. "Mrs. Vance, what an honor to have you back with us." "The pleasure is mine, Robert. A beautiful night, isn't it?" As she walked through the club corridors toward the main ballroom, Clara could hear the murmur of the crowd inside. Music, laughter, lively conversations. The sound of people who had no idea that their lives were about to be turned upside down. She stopped before the double doors of the ballroom, adjusted her pearl necklace one last time, and took a deep breath. On the other side of those doors were Elias and Serena, probably still delighting in the attention they were receiving, still believing they had conquered something important. They had no idea that the true queen had arrived to reclaim her throne. CTA. The moment of truth is here. Do you think Elias will choose his wife or his mistress? Predict the outcome in the comments and hit that like button. The unspoken rules of war. The Metropolitan Elite Club ballroom was at its peak when Clara Sterling made her entrance. The orchestra played a Strauss waltz. Couples danced elegantly in the center of the floor, and the buzz of conversations created a symphony of well-mannered civility. Crystal chandeliers cast golden light onto the gowns and immaculate tuxedos, creating an atmosphere of refined opulence. Elias Vance was near the bar, laughing loudly at a joke that Marcus Thorne had just told, when the first whisper reached his ears. Clara arrived. The smile froze on his face. He turned slowly, searching with his eyes for the familiar figure of his wife, but couldn't locate her in the crowd. A part of his brain still hoped it was a rumor, that someone had mistaken a brunette in a black dress for Clara. "Elias!" Eleanor Harrington's voice sounded behind him like the harbinger of a storm. "Your wife looks stunning tonight." He turned and saw Eleanor with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of smile high society women wore when they were about to witness the public humiliation of someone they deemed deserving. It was then that he saw her. Clara entered the main ballroom with the serenity of a queen returning to her palace after a long exile. There was something different about her, an aura of power and self-confidence that Elias didn't remember seeing before. The black Chanel gown hugged her silhouette with mathematical elegance. The pearls on her neck caught the light hypnotically, and her brown hair gleamed like polished silk. But the most striking thing was her posture. Clara didn't walk. She glided. Every movement was deliberate, every gesture calculated for maximum impact. And wherever she passed, conversation ceased, eyes turned, and a respectful silence spread like ripples in a pond. Elias felt his mouth go dry. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Clara command a room like this. It was as if she had transformed from a supporting character to the protagonist of her own life. Across the room, Serena Hayes was telling an anecdote to a group of executives' wives when she noticed her audience had become distracted. They were all staring intently at something or someone behind her. "What's going on?" she asked, turning to follow the direction of their gazes. And then she saw her too. Serena had often imagined what her first encounter with Elias's legitimate wife would be like. In her fantasies, Clara would be a faded, visibly aged woman, clearly inferior in every aspect that mattered. The reality was a brutal shock. The woman walking toward her radiated a natural elegance that no amount of money could buy. There was something almost aristocratic about her posture, an innate class that suddenly made Serena feel like a child playing dress-up in her mother's clothes. Clara greeted the guests with the perfect grace of someone born into that world. A kiss on the cheek for Eleanor Harrington, a warm handshake with the senator, a kind word for the judge's wife. Every interaction reaffirmed her position in the social hierarchy, not as the betrayed wife seeking sympathy, but as the grande dame returning to her rightful place. "Clara, darling," Penelope Alva's voice cut the air like a crystal bell. The judge's wife approached with open arms, clearly thrilled to see her friend after months of absence. "What immense joy to have you back. I missed you so much." The embrace between the two women was warm and genuine, contrasting sharply with the artificial displays of affection that characterized most interactions in that environment. Serena watched the scene with growing discomfort, realizing for the first time that Clara wasn't just Elias's wife. She was a respected and beloved figure in her own right within that society. "Penelope, you are radiant as ever," Clara replied, her melodious voice carrying a tone of genuine affection. "How is Robert? I heard the Supreme Court appointment was confirmed." Yes, we are very happy. But tell me about you. Where have you been hiding all these months? We missed you so much." Clara smiled with mysterious elegance. "I was taking care of some personal matters. Sometimes a woman needs time to reorganize priorities." The answer was diplomatically vague, but loaded with undertones that did not escape the women present. They all knew about the situation with Elias and Serena, and now they began to understand that Clara's absence from social events had not been due to humiliation or despair, but to strategy. While Clara conversed, Elias remained paralyzed near the bar. Part of him wanted to approach, greet her as if nothing had changed, maintain the facade of harmonious marriage they always presented in public. Another part, the cowardly and guilty part, simply wanted to disappear. The decision was made by Serena. The young woman, driven by a toxic mix of jealousy, security, and youthful arrogance, decided she would not be overshadowed by an older woman, however elegant. After all, she was the one with Elias now. She was the one wearing the expensive gifts, occupying his bed, who had future plans with him. Serena whispered to Elias, pulling him by the arm. "Let's go greet your wife. It's the polite thing to do." Elias swallowed hard. "Serena, maybe this isn't the best time." "Nonsense," she countered, already walking toward the group around Clara. "We are all civilized adults here." Serena didn't realize she was about to commit the most catastrophic mistake of her young life. In her limited mind, this would be the moment of her official coronation, when she would introduce herself as Elias's new woman before the former wife, definitively establishing the new hierarchical order. Clara saw the couple approaching long before they got close. Her eyes met Elias's for a brief moment, and he visibly shrank under her gaze. It was as if she could see right through him, seeing all the guilt, all the embarrassment, all the cowardice he carried. "Clara," Elias forced a smile upon reaching the group. His voice came out higher pitched than he intended. What a surprise to see you here." The silence that followed was deafening. All nearby conversations ceased. All eyes turned to the trio, and even the orchestra seemed to lower the volume. It was as if the entire ballroom was holding its breath, waiting for what would happen next. Clara looked at Elias for a long moment, her expression perfectly serene. When she finally spoke, her voice had the sharp coldness of tempered steel. Elias, what an interesting coincidence. She paused, allowing his embarrassment to intensify. I thought you were in Chicago this week, an important meeting with investors. Didn't you say so? The lie was exposed with surgical elegance. Elias had invented this excuse to explain his absence from home in recent days, when, in fact, he was in a luxury hotel with Serena, preparing for the ball. Now, confronted with his own dishonesty in public, he stammered. The meeting was cancelled, last minute. What a shame, Clara murmured, her tone suggesting the exact opposite. Well, at least you didn't miss an event as important as this one. It was then that Serena decided to intervene. The young woman, misinterpreting the moment and believing Clara was being submissive by not directly confronting the situation, took a step forward with a smile that was meant to be sympathetic, but sounded condescending. You must be Clara, she said, extending her hand with perfectly manicured red nails. I'm Serena Hayes. I've heard so much about you. The group around them collectively held their breath. The tension was so palpable that even the most distant guests began to discreetly approach, sensing that something extraordinary was about to happen. Clara looked at Serena's extended hand for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, she delicately greeted her. Serena, yes, I've also heard quite a lot about you. The phrase was uttered with such elegance that it took a few seconds for Serena to realize the venom contained within. Elias told me you worked together, Clara continued, her voice maintaining the perfectly polite tone of high society. Something about consulting on project development? Elias opened his mouth to reply, but Serena interrupted him, clearly eager to establish her true position. Oh, we are much more than work colleagues, she laughed, a sharp sound that echoed uncomfortably in the silence of the ballroom. In fact, Elias and I have a very special relationship. The words left her mouth with the confidence of someone who believed they were revealing a truth that would give them power over the situation. Instead, she had just walked into the most elegant trap ever built at a New York social event. Clara tilted her head slightly, as if processing a particularly interesting piece of information. Ah, I see, she said, her voice still maintaining that deadly politeness. How courageous, on your part, to make this public like this. The word courageous was pronounced in such a way that it sounded exactly like its antonym. Serena began to realize something was wrong, but her youth and inexperience did not allow her to fully decode the nuances of the conversation. Elias, on the other hand, was pale as paper. He knew Clara well enough to recognize the danger signs, the overly polite tone, the smile that didn't reflect in her eyes, the upright, controlled posture. She was furious, but expressing that fury through the refined codes of high society, which made her infinitely more dangerous than any emotional outburst. CTA. The tension is overwhelming. How will Clara deliver the fatal blow? Tell me your predictions. If you're loving this takedown, don't forget to subscribe. The final coup. The Queen reclaims her throne. Clara, Elias tried to intervene. Maybe we should... Oh, Elias, she interrupted him softly. There is no need for embarrassment among civilized people. She turned back to Serena with renewed interest. Tell me, dear, how long have you two been working together? Serena, interpreting the question as an opportunity to establish her supremacy, replied with youthful pride. About 8 months. Elias has been a wonderful mentor. Mentor, Clara repeated, as if savoring the word. What an interesting term to describe the relationship. The air in the ballroom was so charged with tension that even the waiters had stopped circulating with the champagne trays. Dozens of eyes were fixed on the trio, and Charles Monroe, the social journalist, watched everything from a strategic distance, clearly taking mental notes for his column the next day. Eleanor Harrington approached the group with a smile that promised trouble. "Clara, darling," she said, her voice laced with false innocence. "What a stunning dress. Chanel, isn't it? I've always envied your impeccable taste in fashion." "Thank you, Eleanor. You know how it is. Some pieces never go out of style, do they?" The insinuation was clear. True elegance is timeless, unlike the passing fashion displayed by certain younger people. Serena, finally starting to realize she was being subtly attacked, decided to counterattack. "Your dress is lovely too," she said to Clara, her tone attempting to sound generous but failing miserably. "Very classic. Must have been frightfully expensive." The comment was a grotesque mistake. Suggesting that Clara cared about the price of clothes, or worse, that she needed to justify her spending, was a demonstration of a lack of class that made several women present widen their eyes in shock. Clara smiled. This time, a truly dangerous smile. "Dear," she said, her voice soft as velvet but sharp as a razor. "When one has genuine class, the price becomes irrelevant. It is something one is either born with or never acquires." The phrase fell on Serena like a silent bomb. For a moment, the young woman was speechless, slowly processing the fact that she had been publicly declassed in the most elegant way possible. Elias tried to intervene again, his voice desperate. "Well, I think we should all—" "Elias," Clara interrupted him again, this time turning to him with full attention. "Since we are all here, gathered so casually, perhaps it's a good time to clarify a few things." The entire ballroom seemed to have stopped. Even the orchestra had ceased playing, as if the musicians also wanted to hear what would happen next. "Clarifications are always welcome," murmured Eleanor Harrington, barely containing her excitement. Clara adjusted the pearls on her neck with deliberately slow movements, like a matador preparing the final thrust. "The thing is," she said, her voice now carrying a tone of genuine amusement, "there are certain illusions that need to be dispelled before they cause more embarrassment than they already have." Serena felt a shiver of panic run down her spine. There was something about Clara's attitude, an absolute confidence, a nearly predatory serenity, that suggested she knew something important, something that would completely change the game. "I don't understand," Serena choked out. "Oh dear," Clara replied, her smile now genuinely radiant. "You will understand. All of you will." And it was then that Clara Sterling began to methodically, elegantly, and irreversibly destroy the life of everyone who had underestimated her power. "Elias," Clara said, her voice cutting the silence of the ballroom like crystal against crystal. "Since we are among friends, why don't you tell Serena about our conversation last night?" Elias's face paled until it rivaled the pearls on his wife's neck. His eyes widened in absolute panic, because there had been no conversation with Clara the night before, or any night in the last few weeks. I don't know what you're talking about," he stammered, but his shaky voice betrayed his nervousness. Clara tilted her head with feigned curiosity, as if genuinely surprised by her husband's response. "No? How odd. Perhaps my memory is failing. Or perhaps you forgot to mention to your mentor that we are still married." The word mentor was pronounced with such irony that several people in the group had to stifle nervous giggles. Serena felt the blood rush to her face, finally realizing she was being publicly ridiculed. "Of course we know you are married," Serena said, trying to regain some control over the situation. "But marriages evolve, don't they? Sometimes people find happiness in different places." "Ah, yes," Clara agreed with a graceful nod. "Evolution, a fascinating concept." She turned to Eleanor Harrington with a conspiratorial air. "Eleanor, you who have been married for 30 years to Robert, have you experienced this evolution?" Eleanor laughed, a crystalline sound, full of aristocratic malice. "Never, darling. Robert knows his place too well." The comment was a direct thrust at Elias's masculinity, suggesting he had failed as a man by not keeping his house in order. "But the issue," Clara continued, now speaking directly to Serena, "is that you made a mistake that none of the others made." "What mistake?" The question came out as a strangled whisper. "You believed you had won." The words fell on Serena with the weight of a judicial sentence. She looked around, seeing for the first time the expressions of the guests. Not admiration or envy, as she had imagined, but pity mixed with aristocratic disdain. "Elias never told me about the others," she stammered, turning to him for denial, for explanation, for anything that would restore her reality. Elias couldn't look her in the eyes. His guilt was plastered on his face like a tattoo. "Of course he didn't tell you," Clara said softly. "Why would he? It would ruin the fantasy he creates for each of you. The fantasy that you are special, that you are different, that this time it's true love. But the cruelty," Clara said, "is not in having affairs. Powerful men have always had mistresses. It's almost a tradition. The cruelty lies in creating false expectations, in making these women believe they can occupy a place that was never intended for them." Serena finally exploded. "And what place is that? The place of the submissive wife who accepts everything in silence." The entire ballroom held its breath. It was the first time anyone had directly confronted Clara, and everyone wanted to see how she would respond. Clara smiled. Not the elegant, controlled smile she had maintained all night, but a genuine, almost amused smile. "Oh, darling," she said, her voice carrying a mixture of pity and condescension. "You really don't understand, do you? You think I'm here as the humiliated wife, trying to win back an unfaithful husband?" She paused, sweeping her eyes over all the faces around her. "I didn't come here to fight for Elias. I came to return him." The silence that followed was absolute. "Return him?" Serena repeated, confused. "Yes, dear, you can keep him." Clara made an elegant gesture with her hand, as if handing over an unwelcome gift. "In fact, I insist you keep him. After all, you deserve each other." Elias finally found his voice. "Clara, what are you talking about?" "I'm talking about freedom, Elias. Yours and mine." She opened her Hermes bag and withdrew a sealed envelope. "The divorce papers were filed yesterday. You should receive the official notification on Monday." The envelope passed from hand to hand, like a grenade with the pin removed. Elias held it with trembling fingers, his face expressing absolute shock. But we didn't even talk about this." "We did talk, Elias, for 8 months. Every time you came home smelling of another woman's perfume. Every time you lied about where you had been. Every time you treated me like furniture that decorates the house but doesn't participate in the life happening inside it." Clara's voice remained serene, but there was tempered steel in every word. "The conversation was long and unilateral, but it happened. How much do you want?" was the first thing Elias managed to say. The question revealed so much about his character that several women present made ill-disguised expressions of disgust. "Ah, Elias," Clara said, shaking her head with false sadness. "Always reducing everything to money. I don't want your money, darling. I have my own." "Have your own?" "Yes. Grandma Beatrice's inheritance, which you always assumed was insignificant because it was just womanly things like real estate and stocks, is actually worth more than your company." She smiled. "Much more. Furthermore," Clara continued casually, "my art consulting business has grown quite a bit in recent years. International clients, you know. People who value authenticity and expertise." Serena finally understood the full dimension of her humiliation. She had bet all her chips on a man who she now discovered was not even half the prize she had imagined him to be. "So you are giving us your blessing?" she stammered, trying to find some thread of dignity to cling to. "Oh dear, it's not exactly a blessing," Clara replied with deadly kindness. "It's more like returning a defective product to the store." The phrase echoed through the ballroom like a gunshot. Several people laughed openly, unable to contain their reaction to the brutal elegance of the response. Elias finally exploded. "Clara, you can't humiliate me like this publicly." "Humiliate you?" She seemed genuinely surprised. "Elias, darling, I did nothing but tell the truth. If the truth is humiliating, perhaps the problem isn't with me." Charles Monroe approached with his social predator's smile. "Clara, may I have a statement for my column?" "Of course, Charles." She turned to him with the grace of an experienced actress. "You can say that I am starting a new chapter in my life. Sometimes, when a door closes, we realize that it was actually keeping us trapped in a space too small for our dreams." "And future plans?" "I'm moving to Paris next week. I have some interesting projects waiting for me there." Paris. The word fell on Elias like a final sentence. Clara wasn't just divorcing him. She was literally fleeing the country, putting an ocean between them. Serena, attempting one last desperate move, said, "Well, at least now Elias and I can be happy together without secrets or lies." Clara looked at her with a mixture of pity and amusement. "Oh, my sweet, naive darling," she said, her voice laden with almost maternal condescension. "Do you really think a man who cheated on his wife with you won't cheat on you with another?" The truth of the statement hit Serena like a punch to the gut. She looked at Elias, searching for some sign of denial, some guarantee of future fidelity. Instead, she saw a man in total panic, more concerned with the financial implications of the divorce than with the feelings of either woman present. "Elias," she whispered, clear plea in her voice. He did not answer. He couldn't answer, because deep down he knew Clara was right. It was in this moment of absolute silence that Clara Sterling delivered the final blow. "Well," Clara said, adjusting the pearls on her neck with an elegant, definitive movement. "It was a pleasure clarifying all of this. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to say goodbye to some dear friends before my trip." She turned to leave, but stopped as if remembering something important. "Oh, and Serena? The red dress is lovely on you, but for charity events, more subdued colors are more appropriate. It's a matter of social education." The final critique was delivered with such elegance that even the most experienced observers needed a few seconds to fully process the brutality of the comment. Clara had just given an etiquette lesson in the middle of a public humiliation, definitively establishing the social hierarchy between them. Serena stood still, paralyzed by shame, while Clara gracefully walked away. Elias remained by her side, but it was obvious to everyone that he was in a state of shock, still processing the speed with which his life had collapsed. Charles Monroe watched the scene with the sharp gaze of someone who had just witnessed the social history of the year. He was already mentally drafting the headline, "The Elegant Vengeance: How Clara Sterling Turned Humiliation into Triumph at the Season's Most Talked About Ball." Question for the audience: do you think Clara should have been kinder in her final critique to Serena? Or was that last etiquette lesson the perfect goodbye to a social climber? Let me know your thoughts. The New Dawn in Paris, 3 years later, Paris. The apartment in the 16th arrondissement overlooked the Eiffel Tower and was decorated with a perfect combination of French elegance and Brazilian sophistication. Clara Sterling, now Clara Dubois, was sitting on the terrace, having breakfast while watching her 2-year-old twin sons, Henri and Sterling, play in the private garden. Pierre Dubois walked onto the terrace carrying a tray with fresh croissants and the morning newspaper. "Mon amour," he said, gently kissing Clara's forehead. "There's an interesting article here about New York." Clara smiled, accepting the cup of coffee he offered her. At 38, she radiated a happiness she had never experienced during her 15 years of marriage to Elias. Pierre was not just a better husband, he was a true partner, someone who respected her intelligence and ambition as much as he admired her beauty. What kind of article? About corporate bankruptcies. It seems a real estate firm called Vance Ventures closed its doors last month. Clara raised an eyebrow with interest. Elias? Apparently. The article mentions poor financial management and legal proceedings. The owner, Elias Vance, is being investigated for fiscal irregularities. Clara felt no pleasure in the news. That phase of her life was completely over. But there was a certain poetic justice in the fact that Elias, who had always considered himself financially superior to her, had lost everything due to his own incompetence. "And the young woman who was with him that night at the Metropolitan Club?" asked Pierre, who knew the whole story. "Serena? I heard she married a dentist in the Hamptons. Apparently she learned her lesson about not betting on losing horses." Pierre laughed, a rich, warm sound that echoed across the terrace. "You are terrible, ma chérie, but poetic justice, as we say." Henri ran up to the table speaking an adorable mixture of English and French. "Maman, regarde! I got this flower for you." Clara picked up her son, accepting the small daisy he had picked in the garden. Sterling soon joined them, demanding equal attention. "Mes petits trésors," murmured Pierre, watching the scene with obvious adoration. This was the life Clara had built for herself, not as revenge against Elias, but as a reward for her own courage. She had transformed betrayal into liberation, humiliation into opportunity, an ending into a new beginning. The Galerie du Bois had become one of the most prestigious in Paris under her curatorship, and she was expecting her third child, a girl they would name Beatrice, in honor of the grandmother who had left her the inheritance that made her independence possible. As she watched her children play in the Parisian garden, Clara reflected on the night at the Metropolitan Elite Club 3 years ago. She had planned every detail of that public humiliation, but now she realized that the true victory had not been destroying Elias and Serena that night. The true victory was this: a life built on her own terms, with a man who loved her completely, children who filled her heart, and a career that fulfilled her soul. In the end, Clara Sterling had discovered that the best revenge is not the destruction of one's enemies, but the construction of a life so spectacular that it makes everything they did to try to diminish her irrelevant. Thank you for watching this incredible story of power, elegance, and redemption. If you loved Clara's journey, please like and share this video, and subscribe for more empowering stories.